The alien king Taurus hissed with cold satisfaction while overseeing his galactic reign of terror, not knowing that mere humans who'd just woken from their cryo sleep would be his downfall. On the bridge of his monolithic Qatarian flagship, Taurus slouched upon an intricately carved throne of bleak grey rock, perfectly matching his towering, muscular frame covered in obsidian reptilian scales. Peering across the array of drifting holographic screens through fiery red eyes, he saw neatly ordered reports showing the thousands of worlds he'd enslaved and ravaged, all bowing to his cruel will. My liege, the last dwindling pockets of resistance are broken and crushed beneath your unstoppable Qatarian armada, awaiting your final word to end them, growled his grizzled second-in-command. Zog, a hulking brute of rippling alien muscle, adorned with scars of 100 conquests. Good. I want their surrender to be total. No mercy, either they all kneel before me or they all die screaming, Taurus rumbled, his jagged maw of metal-rending teeth flashing a chilling, sinister grin. Drifting silently on the forgotten fringes of this enslaved galaxy, the BHS Hope slumbered peacefully, an enormous human colony ship that was the last vestige of humanity, carrying rows of human refugees frozen for centuries in sealed cryopods. The ship's tireless AI watchdog suddenly registered an incoming vessel stalking the Hope, a bristling Qatarian war scout armed to the teeth and searching for the missing humans so King Taurus could finish his domination of the galaxy. Responding swiftly to the emergency protocols, the AI sounded piercing klaxon alarms and streaked the black hallways with erratic warning pulses as it overrode the stasis locks and began the arduous process of waking the humans from their centuries of slumber. With a hiss of escaping air and billowing clouds of dissipating cryo smoke, the pods cracked open, spilling out the woozy awakening humans that were the galaxy's last hope for freedom. The first to jerkily emerge was Captain Bobby Thompson, an Adonis of rock-hard muscle, grizzled from the scars of Earth's many bloody wars before the Exodus. Staggering out on trembling, atrophied legs, he scanned the Hope's cryo bay, steadying himself against the clammy metal of the capsules as his elite military crew began snapping into focus around him. He knew if he couldn't rally his people to defeat Taurus swiftly, after centuries of vulnerable sleep, then the Hope would be blasted into forgotten stardust, and with it humanity's dreams of a new beginning. All would be lost to the depraved whims of a monstrous tyrant. Bobby staggered down the Hope's flickering corridors, struggling to walk on trembling legs that felt like rubber, weakened from centuries of cryo-sleep. The whirring servos of the cryo bay doors slammed shut behind him with a pneumatic hiss, sealing away the rows of peacefully slumbering colonists, still locked in their icy sleep. His bleary eyes focused on his battered crew emerging from their pods around him in clouds of dissipating mist, looking equally disoriented and confused. What the hell happened?" croaked his XO Sarah Briggs, a hardened Amazon of a soldier, as she snapped upright and scanned the area with alert eyes. "How long were we out?" Before Bobby could try to respond, the ship's tinny speakers crackled to life with the AI's urgent voice. "Captain, I'm detecting an unidentified vessel approaching, and our weapon systems and engines are offline. We're sitting ducks." Bobby clenched his fists, feeling a growing dread in his gut. "Shit, we need to get this bucket of bolts battle ready on the double. Briggs, you and Rawlings get down to engineering, see if you can get us mobile. Hoffman, Chen, you're with me. We're heading to the armory to break out the big guns." As the crew scrambled to their emergency stations, Bobby pried open a rusted access panel, his strong fingers making the metal shriek as he tore it free. Peering at the darkened status displays beneath, he poked at the corroded tangle of wires until the flickering screen sputtered back to life, running a rapid diagnostic. "Okay, looks like we've got juice in the capacitors for the particle beams, but the barrels are all gummed up with carbon scoring. We'll need to manually purge the blockages so they can fire. Chen, get down to the forward turrets and start clearing them. I'll handle the aft guns." Meanwhile, aboard the sleek obsidian hull of the Qatarian scout ship, the towering reptilian form of Commander Zorg narrowed his fiery red eyes at the sensor readout, seeing the sudden energy surge from the derelict human ship. "Sir, the human vessel is showing signs of activity. Engines and weapons are coming online," hissed his scaly sensor officer. "They survive after all this time? Intriguing. Bring us in closer and power up the ion cannons. If they try anything foolish, we will blast them into cosmic dust," Zorg growled, baring his jagged metal teeth in a vicious smirk. As the Tarian ship stalked closer, Bobby hauled himself into the cramped gunner's seat of the aft turret, his strong hands flying across the archaic controls as he coaxed the particle beams back to life. Peering through the cracked targeting display, he painted the incoming hostile ship with the flickering reticle, his finger tightening on the trigger. Suddenly the comms panel lit up, and the chilling alien visage of Commander Zorg filled the screen, his reptilian eyes blazing with malice. "Human vessel, this is Commander Zorg of the Tarian Dominion. You are trespassing in our sovereign space. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. If you resist, we will destroy you." Bobby narrowed his eyes, meeting Zorg's gaze without flinching. "This is Captain Bobby Thompson of the BHS Hope. With all due respect, Commander, go fuck yourself. This is our home, and we'll defend it to the last." Zorg let out a furious roar, slamming his clawed fist down on the controls. "Then you have sealed your fate, human. All cannons fire." But Bobby was faster on the trigger, stabbing down on the firing stud and sending searing lances of blue-white particle beams scything across the void to slam into the Qatarian ship's hull. The advanced alien armor boiled away under the withering salvo, and gouts of molten slag spewed into space as the beams tore deep into the enemy ship. Caught off guard by the shocking power of the human weapons, Zorg bellowed with rage as warning klaxons blared across his bridge. "Damage report!" Zorg pounded his fist against the sparking controls in fury, knowing he had gravely underestimated these humans. "This isn't over, primates. I'll be back, with enough firepower to reduce you to your component atoms." As the battered Tarian ship limped away, trailing smoke and debris, Bobby sagged back in his seat, his heart pounding. They had won this skirmish, but he knew this was just the opening salvo in a war that would determine the very fate of the human race. Unbuckling himself from the gunner's chair, he pushed off and drifted back down to the main corridor. Seeing his crew gathering there, all wearing matching expressions of grim determination. "We're not out of the woods yet, people. That was just a scout, and we know they'll be back with a hell of a lot more guns," Bobby said grimly. "We need to get this ship fully operational, strip it for anything useful, and then get the hell out of here. We can't fight a whole damn alien empire with one busted-ass colony ship." Briggs crossed her arms, frowning. "Where the hell would we go? We're in the ass end of space, and the charts are centuries out of date." "Then we find some friends, and fast. There have to be some other poor bastards out here who hate the Qatarians as much as we do," Bobby replied. "This is going to be a long fight, and we'll need all the help we can get. But first, we arm up, and we survive. The Qatarians want a war. They've got one, and it's not going to be the cakewalk they think it is." "Does—" Bobby gripped the armrests of the captain's chair, his eyes scanning the tactical displays. The Phoenix streaked through space, its cloaking device engaged, rendering it invisible to the Qatarian sensors. "All right, people. Our next target is the Qatarian outpost on Zeta Prime. Intel suggests they've got a massive stockpile of weapons and supplies there. We go in hard and fast, hit 'em where it hurts, and bug out before they know what hit them," Bobby said, his voice steely with determination. The crew nodded, their faces set with grim purpose. They'd struck a dozen Qatarian targets in the past month, each time dealing a crippling blow to the Empire's grip on the galaxy. As the Phoenix dropped out of warp on the edge of the Zeta Prime system, Bobby watched the holographic display flicker to life, showing the sprawling Qatarian outpost nestled on the planet's barren surface. "Briggs, take us in, full stealth. Chen, power up the EMP cannon and target their comms array. Hoffman, as soon as that's down, you and your Marines drop in and secure that weapons cache." The crew snapped to action, hands flying across consoles as the Phoenix sliced through space unseen. The EMP cannon thrummed with power, a crackling ball of energy building at its tip. "Firing," Chen said, slamming his palm down on the firing stud. The cannon pulsed, sending a rippling wave of electromagnetic energy washing over the outpost. Lights flickered and died, consoles sparked and went dark. "Drop pods away," Hoffman said, as a dozen armored Marines rocketed towards the planet's surface. On the ground, the Marines fanned out, securing the perimeter of the weapons facility. Hoffman blasted the door open with a breaching charge, storming inside with his team. Qatarian guards, caught off guard, fell before the Marines' withering fire. "Jackpot," Hoffman said, eyeing the rows of advanced weapons and crates of ammo. "Let's load up and get the hell out of here." As the Marines hauled the weapons back to the drop pods, Bobby watched the tactical display. His eyes narrowed. Suddenly, a cluster of red dots appeared at the edge of the screen. "Shit, we've got incoming. Qatarian reinforcements closing fast," he snapped. The crew scrambled to their stations, hands flying over controls. "Hoffman, get your ass back on board, double time. Briggs, spin up the warp drive. Chen, divert all power to rear shields." The Phoenix shuddered as the drop pod slammed home in the hangar bay, the Marines piling out and racing to their posts. On the screen, the Qatarian ships grew larger, their weapons glowing with deadly intent. Suddenly the Phoenix's comm system crackled to life, a chilling reptilian voice filling the bridge. "Attention, human vessel. This is General Cragg of the Qatarian Empire. Surrender now or be destroyed." Bobby's eyes widened in recognition, remembering their last encounter on the Narian homeworld. His jaw tightened, finger hovering over the comm button. "Greg, you scaly bastard. I thought you'd have learned your lesson last time," Bobby growled. "Ah, Captain Thompson. I had hoped to find you here. Your interference has gone on long enough. Surrender and I promise your deaths will be quick." Bobby slammed his fist on the comm button, cutting the channel. "Briggs, get us the hell out of here, now!" The Phoenix shuddered as the blasts hammered against its shields, alarms blaring across the bridge. Bobby gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white. "Shields at 30%, Chen yelled over the cacophony. "We can't take much more of this." Bobby gritted his teeth, watching the warp drive's charge slowly build. Come on," he muttered. Suddenly the drive pulsed green, and Briggs punched the throttle. The Phoenix leapt forward, stars blurring into streaks of light, as it tore open a warp tunnel and vanished. On the bridge of his flagship, Cragg slammed his fist onto the armrest of his command chair, a growl of frustration rumbling in his throat. "They escaped again," he snarled. "No matter, they can't run forever. We'll find them, and when we do, I will take great pleasure in personally ending the humans' pathetic resistance." Back aboard the Phoenix, Bobby sagged in his chair, the adrenaline slowly draining from his system. They'd struck another blow against the Terrians, but he knew their fight was far from over. "Good work, people," he said, looking around at his weary crew. "But we can't rest yet. The Qatarians will be hunting us harder than ever now. We need to keep hitting them, and we need allies." Briggs leaned forward, a pensive look on her face. "What about that message we received, the one about the secret Qatarian weapons facility?" Bobby frowned, remembering the cryptic transmission. "It could be a trap, but we can't afford to pass up any intel that could give us an edge." He stood, squaring his shoulders. "Set a course for the coordinates in the message and keep your eyes peeled. I don't like the smell of this." The Phoenix banked hard, altering course towards the remote, uninhabited planet. Bobby stared out the viewscreen, a sense of unease growing in his gut. As they entered orbit, the scanners swept the planet's surface, searching for any signs of life. "I'm not picking up anything," Chen said, frowning at his display. "No power signatures, no comms traffic. It's dead down there." "I don't like this," Briggs muttered, her hand resting on her sidearm. "It's too quiet." Bobby nodded, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. "Agreed. But we're here now, so let's set down and see what we can find. Hoffman, you and your team are with me. The rest of you, keep the engines hot and be ready to bug out at a moment's notice." The Phoenix settled onto the planet's dusty surface, the ramp lowering with a hiss of hydraulics. Bobby and the Marines moved out, weapons at the ready, scanning the barren landscape for any signs of a trap. Suddenly the air shimmered, and a dozen Qatarian stealth ships decloaked, disruptor cannons swiveling to target the humans. Crag's voice boomed from hidden speakers, dripping with malice. "Did you really think I would let you walk into my trap so easily, human? Your pathetic resistance ends here." Bobby dove for cover as the Tarians opened fire, disruptor blasts sizzling through the air. The Marines returned fire, their pulse rifles chattering as they sought targets. "Phoenix, we need extraction now," Bobby yelled into his comm, ducking as a blast seared overhead. "Negative, Captain, they've got us pinned down." Briggs' voice crackled back, strained with tension. "We're taking heavy fire. Shields are failing." Bobby gritted his teeth, popping up to snap off a shot at a charging Qatarian shock trooper. The alien's head snapped back, ichor spraying from the ruin of its skull. "Hoffman, fall back to the ship. We've got to get out of here," Bobby ordered, laying down a barrage of covering fire. The Marines broke contact, sprinting for the ramp as disruptor fire chewed up the ground around them. Bobby was the last aboard, slamming his fist on the ramp controls. As the Phoenix lifted off, the Qatarian ships closed in, their cannons hammering at the weakened shields. The bridge shook with each impact, consoles sparking and smoke filling the air. "Shields are gone. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5, Chen shouted, his fingers flying over the damage control board. Briggs hauled hard on the controls, sending the Phoenix into a gut-wrenching spiral to evade the incoming fire. "I can't shake them. They're all over us." "Briggs, bring us about straight at them," he ordered, ignoring the looks of disbelief from his crew. "Chen, divert all power to the EMP cannon, overcharge it." Understanding dawned on Briggs's face, followed by a grim nod. The Phoenix swung around, diving straight towards the heart of the Qatarian formation. Bobby waited, watching the range tick down, the Qatarian ships growing larger in the view screen. At the last possible second, he slammed his hand down on the firing stud. A blinding pulse of energy erupted from the cannon, washing over the Qatarian ships like a tidal wave. Their shields flickered and died, systems shorting out in showers of sparks. Seizing the moment, Briggs punched the throttle, the Phoenix leaping forward into warp, leaving the crippled Qatarian fleet behind. In the sudden silence that followed, Bobby slumped back in his chair, his heart pounding. They'd survived, but only just. "Damage report," he said, his voice weary. "Hull breach is sealed, but we're leaking atmosphere. Shields are down, weapons are fried. We're in bad shape, Captain," Chen replied, shaking his head. Bobby sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Find us somewhere to lay low and lick our wounds, and get started on repairs. We're going to need everything we've got for what comes next." He stood, facing his crew, his eyes hard with determination. "This isn't over, not by a long shot. Crag and his Emperor think they can beat us, but they're wrong. We're going to find allies, we're going to build our forces, and then we're going to take the fight to them. The Qatarians want a war? They've got one, and we're going to make damn sure they regret ever starting it." A blinding flash of plasma illuminated the battlefield as the mysterious figure carved a path of destruction through the Qatarian ranks. Zephyr moved with a fluid grace, his plasma swords humming and sizzling as they cleaved through armor and flesh alike. The Qatarian soldiers, caught off guard by this unexpected ally, fell back in disarray. Bobby and his crew, seizing the opportunity, rallied and pressed the attack. Pulse rifles chattered and grenades detonated, adding to the chaos. Slowly but surely they began to turn the tide. Crag, seeing his forces faltering, let out a roar of rage. He charged forward, his massive warhammer crackling with energy. Zephyr leapt to meet him, plasma swords flashing. The two warriors clashed in a blaze of sparks and fury, their weapons moving almost too fast to follow. Crag's hammer slammed into the ground, leaving craters in its wake, but Zephyr danced around the blows, his sword scoring hits on the general's armor. Around them the battle raged on, but Bobby could see the Qatarians were losing heart. With a final desperate push, they broke the enemy lines. Crag, realizing the battle was lost, disengaged from Zephyr and signaled the retreat. The Qatarians fell back to their ships, harried all the way by the humans' fire. In the sudden silence that followed, Bobby approached Zephyr warily, his rifle still at the ready. Not that I'm not grateful for the help, but who the hell are you? He demanded. Zephyr deactivated his plasma swords and turned to face Bobby, his eyes hard. I am Zephyr, former assassin of the Terrian Empire, and I know how to hurt them. In the aftermath of the battle, Zephyr revealed the existence of a secret Ktarian weapons facility hidden on a heavily guarded moon. There, he said, the Ktarians were developing a new kind of biological weapon, one that could target specific species' genetic codes. Bobby and his crew were horrified by the implications. Such a weapon could mean the extinction of entire races, the Ktarians able to commit genocide on an unimaginable scale. They knew they had to act. Zephyr, though Bobby was still wary of trusting him completely, offered to help them infiltrate the facility. His inside knowledge could be the key to their success. The Phoenix set course for the moon, Zephyr guiding them through the treacherous defenses. With the ship's cloaking device engaged, they slipped past the sensor nets and patrol ships, landing undetected on the moon's barren surface. The facility itself was a looming monstrosity of black metal and flickering lights, bristling with gun emplacements and armored guards. But Zephyr knew a secret way in, a maintenance tunnel that would bypass the main defenses. They moved quickly and silently, the dim red emergency lighting casting eerie shadows on the walls. The tunnel led them deep into the heart of the facility, past humming generators and churning machinery. Finally, they emerged into a cavernous laboratory, filled with rows of glowing tanks and bubbling vials. In the center, a massive holographic display showed a slowly rotating DNA helix, sections of it highlighted in pulsing red. There, Zephyr said, pointing to a bank of computers. That's the research data. We need to download it and then destroy the samples. They set to work, Briggs and Chen hacking into the Ktarian systems, while the others planted explosive charges around the lab. But just as the download was completing, alarms began to blare. Taurian guards poured into the lab, disruptor rifles firing. The humans took cover, returning fire as they frantically grabbed the data drives. They fought their way out of the lab, the explosions of the charges shaking the facility around them. Smoke filled the corridors as they battled through the complex, the Ktarians dogging their every step. Finally, they burst out onto the moon's surface, racing for the Phoenix. But as the ship came into view, so did another, far more terrifying sight. Descending from orbit was General Cragg's flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons. Fighters poured from its launch bays, screaming towards the Phoenix. On the bridge of his ship, Cragg grinned savagely as he watched the human ship try desperately to evade his fighters. He had tracked them from the ambush, his thirst for vengeance driving him forward. He would not let them escape this time. He would crush them, grind them to dust beneath his heel. The humans would pay for their defiance, and he would be the one to make them scream. Aboard the Phoenix, alarms blared as the ship shuddered under the onslaught. Consoles sparked and smoked, the lights flickering. Bobby gripped the arms of his chair, his mind racing. They were outgunned and outmatched, Cragg's flagship bearing down on them like a looming colossus. But they had the research data. They knew the Ktarians' most guarded secrets, and that, he realized, was a weapon more powerful than any laser or missile. He opened a channel broadcasting on all frequencies. Attention Ktarian vessels. This is Captain Bobby Thompson of the Phoenix. We have stolen your research data on the bioweapon. Cease your attack, or we will transmit this data to every species in the galaxy. On his bridge, Cragg froze, his eyes widening in shock and rage. The human was bluffing, he had to be, but if he wasn't, the consequences would be catastrophic. The Empire's enemies would have the key to their ultimate weapon, the ability to turn it against them. Snarling with hate, Cragg gave the order to stand down. The Ktarian ships pulled back, the fighters returning to their hangars. Aboard the Phoenix, the crew watched in stunned disbelief as the Ktarian fleet withdrew. Bobby slumped back in his chair, adrenaline still surging through his veins. They had won. Against all odds, they had struck a blow against the Ktarians that would be felt across the galaxy. But the fight was far from over. As the Phoenix jumped to warp, leaving the moon and the Tarian fleet behind, Bobby knew that this was just the beginning. The Tarians would be coming for them now, with all the might of their empire, and the humans would need every ally, every weapon, every trick they could muster to survive. But they would fight, for their lives, for their freedom, for the fate of the galaxy itself. The Catarians had started this war, but the humans would be the ones to finish it. The Phoenix hurtled through the stars, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a species that refused to be broken. And in the hearts of its crew, a fire burned, a resolve unshakable and unyielding. They were human. They would not bow, they would not break, they would fight and they would win. No matter the cost. The moon's barren surface erupted in a storm of plasma fire and sizzling lasers as Bobby, Zephyr and the Phoenix crew clashed with Crag's elite Catarian shock troops in a desperate battle. Pulse rifles chattered, grenades detonated, and energy blades hummed as the two forces collided in a brutal melee. Bobby found himself locked in vicious hand-to-hand combat with Crag, the towering reptilian general's eyes blazing with malice. Crag's massive warhammer slammed into the ground, leaving craters in its wake, but Bobby managed to dodge the blows, retaliating with swift strikes from his electrified combat baton. Around them, Zephyr and the others fought with grim determination against the overwhelming numbers of the Catarian soldiers. Zephyr's plasma swords flashed and sizzled as he cut through armor and scales, his movements a blur of deadly precision. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the moon's surface, and geysers of flame and debris erupted from the weapons facility as the explosives detonated deep within its core. The chain reaction spread rapidly, tearing the complex apart and sending shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. The crew fought their way back to the ship, desperately holding off the Catarians as they retreated. Bobby and Crag's duel raged on, the two leaders trading blows as they neared the Phoenix's hangar bay. With a final desperate surge of strength, Bobby managed to land a crushing blow to Crag's skull, sending the general staggering back. Seizing the moment, Bobby slammed his fist onto the airlock controls, opening the outer doors. The sudden decompression sucked Crag out into the void, his roar of rage fading as he tumbled away into space. Bobby clung to the airlock frame, gritting his teeth against the pull of vacuum until the doors slammed shut again. Staggering onto the bridge, Bobby collapsed into his chair as Briggs punched the engines to full throttle. The Phoenix blasted away from the doomed moon just as its surface buckled and shattered, consumed by the exploding weapons facility. In the aftermath of the battle, as the Phoenix soared through the stars, Bobby and his crew took stock of their new situation. With the Catarian bioweapon data secured and a major blow struck against the Empire, the Resistance had gained a significant advantage. But their actions had also drawn the full wrath of King Taurus himself. Reports began to filter in of Tarian fleets being recalled from across the galaxy, rallying to their Emperor's call for a massive counterstrike against the rebel forces. On the bridge of the Phoenix, Bobby and his crew worked tirelessly to analyze the stolen bioweapon data, searching for any weaknesses or countermeasures they could exploit. They knew that the coming battles would be the most brutal yet, and that every advantage would be needed to survive. As they pored over the data, a distress call suddenly pierced through the comm channels, a desperate plea for help from a Catarian-occupied world where the local population had risen up in open revolt against their oppressors. Bobby exchanged a glance with his crew, seeing the determination in their eyes. They knew that this was their fight now, not just for their own survival, but for the freedom of every species under the Catarian yoke. Setting course for the besieged planet, the Phoenix prepared for yet another plunge into the fires of war. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the crew of the Phoenix would be at the forefront of the conflict, no matter the cost. The streets of the besieged capital city shook with the thunder of battle as Bobby and the Phoenix crew landed in the heart of the chaos. Pulse rifle fire and the sizzling hiss of plasma weapons filled the air, punctuated by the screams of the wounded and dying. The Catarian occupiers, caught completely off guard by the sudden and fierce uprising, were scrambling to maintain control, their once orderly ranks thrown into disarray. Bobby and his team wasted no time in linking up with the local resistance fighters, their arrival bringing a surge of hope and determination to the embattled rebels. Together, they launched a series of devastating strikes against the Qatarian strongholds scattered throughout the city, using the Phoenix crew's advanced weaponry and tactical expertise to outmaneuver and outfight the enemy at every turn. Zephyr was a whirlwind of destruction, his plasma swords carving a path of carnage through the Qatarian lines. Bobby and the others fought with equal ferocity, their pulse rifles spitting deadly bolts of energy into the enemy ranks. But even as they pushed the Qatarians back, block by hard-fought block, a new threat emerged from the skies above. A massive fleet of Qatarian reinforcements dropped out of hyperspace, the sleek, predatory shapes of their warships filling the horizon. At their head was the flagship of General Cragg himself, the man they had thought dead, now returned and hungry for vengeance. "Attention, human scum!" Cragg's voice boomed from the flagship's loudspeakers, echoing across the embattled city. "Your pathetic rebellion ends here. Prepare to be annihilated." On his order, the Tarian fleet began a devastating orbital bombardment, raining down a storm of plasma and laser fire onto the city below. Buildings shattered and streets erupted into flames as the onslaught tore through the rebel defenses. But Bobby and Zephyr had anticipated this move. Even as the bombardment began, they were already leading teams of resistance fighters in a desperate evacuation of the civilian population, herding them into the relative safety of the underground shelters. At the same time, they revealed their secret weapon, a modified version of the EMP cannon, one capable of punching through the Tarian ship's shields and frying their systems. As the Phoenix rose from the smoke and rubble of the city to confront the enemy fleet, the cannon thrummed with power, its barrel glowing white-hot. "Fire!" Bobby commanded, and a searing bolt of energy lanced out from the Phoenix, slamming into the heart of the Tarian formation. The EMP blast washed over the enemy ships, shorting out their shields and sending arcs of electricity dancing across their hulls. Seizing the moment, a swarm of small, agile fighters piloted by resistance members roared into battle, engaging the crippled Qatarian ships in a vicious close-quarters melee. Explosions lit the sky as the two forces clashed, the resistance fighters weaving and dodging through the enemy fire with daring skill. On the ground, Bobby and his team pressed their advantage, storming the last remaining Tarian strongholds with renewed ferocity. The battle raged on, fierce and chaotic, with losses mounting on both sides. But slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn in favor of the resistance. Cragg, watching from the bridge of his flagship, as his forces crumbled under the onslaught, slammed his fist onto the arm of his command chair in rage and frustration. He knew he had underestimated these humans, these stubborn, tenacious primates who refused to accept defeat. But he would not make that mistake again. Snarling orders to his crew, he commanded a full retreat, vowing to return with an even greater force and crush the rebellion once and for all. As the battered Tarian fleet limped away from the planet, the resistance fighters let out a cheer of victory, their shouts and cries echoing through the ruined streets of the liberated city. Bobby, standing atop a pile of rubble, looked out over the smoking ruins with a grim sense of satisfaction. They had won this battle, but he knew the war was far from over. Cragg and the Qatarian Empire would be back, stronger and more determined than ever to stamp out the fires of rebellion. In the aftermath of their stunning victory, Bobby, Zephyr and the Resistance wasted no time in pressing their advantage. With the Qatarian forces reeling and disorganized, they launched a blistering series of attacks on Qatarian-held worlds, striking with lightning speed and devastating precision. The Phoenix and its escorts would drop out of hyperspace on the edge of a system, cloaking devices engaged. They would race towards the target world, slipping past sensor nets and patrol ships, undetected and unseen. Then, at the critical moment, they would decloak and open fire. The Phoenix's EMP cannon pulsing with blinding blue-white energy. The Tarian ships and planetary defenses would flicker and die, their systems fried by the devastating electromagnetic blast. In the chaos that followed, swarms of resistance fighters would descend on the helpless Qatarian forces, pulse rifles and plasma grenades tearing through their ranks. Supply depots would erupt in flames, communications towers would topple, and fortified positions would be overrun in a matter of hours. News of the Resistance's victories spread like wildfire, igniting the flames of rebellion on a dozen worlds. Species that had long suffered under the Catarian yoke rose up, joining the fight in ever greater numbers. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival was now a full-scale revolution, threatening to topple an empire. On the Catarian homeworld, King Taurus seethed with rage and fear as reports of the Resistance's advances flooded in. His generals and advisors cowered before him, offering excuses and platitudes that did nothing to quell his fury. But Bobby and his crew had anticipated such a move. Using the data they had stolen from the secret weapons facility, they had developed countermeasures and treatments for the Empire's biological arsenal. As the virus began to spread, resistance ships raced to distribute the cure, inoculating millions and limiting the casualties to a bare minimum. The attack, far from cowing the rebellion, only served to harden its resolve. More and more worlds flocked to the resistance banner, their populations united in their hatred of the Catarians and their determination to see the Empire fall. Faced with this growing tide of opposition, Taurus retreated to his inner sanctum, his paranoia and desperation mounting by the day. He railed against his subordinates, demanding ever more extreme measures to crush the rebellion, even as his empire crumbled around him. It was in this climate of fear and desperation that Bobby and Zephyr devised their most audacious plan yet, a direct assault on the Catarian homeworld itself. They gathered a massive fleet, the largest ever assembled by the Resistance, and set course for the heart of the Empire. Using the Phoenix's cloaking device, they slipped past the planet's outer defenses, an invisible dagger aimed at the very throat of the Tarian war machine. But as they entered orbit and prepared to decloak and begin their assault, they were met with an unexpected sight. Hovering above the capital city was a single massive ship, dwarfing even the Phoenix in size. It was a vessel of strange and alien design, all sleek black curves and pulsing red lights, and as the Resistance fleet watched in horror, it began to unfold like a blossoming flower of metal and death, revealing a weapon of unimaginable power. In the throne room of the royal palace, King Taurus grinned, his eyes glinting with madness and triumph. He had played his final card, a doomsday device capable of destroying not just worlds, but entire star systems, and as Bobby and Zephyr watched from the bridge of the Phoenix, he broadcast his ultimatum across every frequency, his voice dripping with malice. "Surrender now, rebels, or watch as I reduce your worlds to ashes. You have defied me for the last time." Bobby and Zephyr exchanged a glance, their faces grim. They had come too far to back down now, but the stakes had just been raised to a terrifying new height. The fate of the galaxy itself hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could tip the scales. The Resistance fleet waited, poised on the knife's edge as Bobby and Zephyr weighed their options. They knew that any attempt to destroy the doomsday weapon would likely result in its activation, dooming billions to a fiery death. But if they surrendered, they would be condemning the galaxy to an eternity of slavery and oppression under Catarian rule. It was an impossible choice, a decision that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. But as they looked out at the assembled ships of the Resistance, at the brave men and women who had fought and bled and died for the chance to be free, they knew there was only one path forward. Zephyr nodded, his face set with grim determination. "We'll find a way to stop that weapon, Bobby. We have to." As the Resistance fleet surged forward, weapons blazing, Bobby could only hope that he was right. The fate of the galaxy was in their hands now, and failure was not an option. Bobby and Zephyr lunged at Taurus, a whirlwind of plasma blades and pulse rifle fire. The Catarian king snarled, his force field shimmering as it deflected their attacks. He retaliated with brutal swings of his energy staff, the crackling weapon carving molten gashes in the throne room's walls. Zephyr ducked and weaved, his plasma swords flashing as he sought an opening in Taurus's defenses. Bobby laid down a barrage of covering fire, his rifle's muzzle glowing white-hot. "So fools!" Taurus roared, his staff clashing against Zephyr's blades in a shower of sparks. You think you can defeat me? I am the king of the Tarians, the conqueror of 1,000 worlds. Bobby gritted his teeth, firing off another burst. You're a tyrant and a murderer, Taurus, and today your reign ends. In the Doomsday Devices control room, the resistance team worked frantically to bypass the security systems. Briggs, the Phoenix's chief engineer, her fingers flying over the holographic controls. Damn it, this is more complex than anything I've ever seen, she muttered, sweat beading on her brow. Chen, try to reroute power from the secondary relays. Hoffman, keep an eye on those readings. If they spike into the red, we're all dead. The team worked in tense silence, the only sounds the hum of the device and the distant crashes of the battle raging in the throne room. Taurus pressed his attack, his energy staff a blur of deadly light. Bobby and Zephyr fought back with every ounce of skill and strength they possessed, but the king's force field made him all but invulnerable. Bobby cried out in pain as Taurus's staff grazed his shoulder, the energy blade searing through his armor and into the flesh beneath. Zephyr leapt to his defense, his plasma swords clashing against the king's staff in a rapid flurry of strikes. But Taurus was too strong, too fast. With a brutal backhand, he sent Zephyr flying across the room, the assassin's swords clattering to the floor. Bobby struggled to rise, his injured shoulder screaming in agony. Suddenly the Doomsday Devices control room erupted in a shower of sparks and smoke. Warning klaxons blared as the device's primary power source shut down with a descending whine. Seizing the moment of distraction, Zephyr leapt to his feet, snatching up his fallen swords. He charged at Taurus, a battle cry tearing from his throat. But the king was too quick. He spun, his energy staff flashing out in a deadly arc. Zephyr's eyes widened in shock as the blade pierced his chest, the scent of charred flesh filling the air. "Zephyr!" Bobby screamed, staggering to his feet. The assassin crumpled to the ground, his swords falling from nerveless fingers. Taurus turned back to Bobby, his eyes blazing with triumph and rage. He raised his staff, the energy blade humming with deadly power. "And now, human, you die." But Bobby was already moving, grief and fury lending strength to his battered body. He charged at Taurus, ducking under the king's swing and slamming into him with the force of a rampaging beast. Bobby seized Taurus by the throat, his fingers digging into the scaly flesh. The king thrashed and choked, his claws scrabbling at Bobby's arms. "This is for Zephyr," Bobby snarled, his voice raw with emotion. "And for every life you've destroyed, every world you've ravaged. It ends now, Taurus. It ends with you." With a final mighty surge of strength, Bobby wrenched the energy staff from Taurus's grip, sending the tyrant king crashing to his knees on the cracked throne room floor. Bobby stood over him, the crackling weapon thrumming in his hands, its glowing tip hovering inches from Taurus's throat. The king glared up at him, defiance still burning in his eyes even as blood trickled from his split lip. Bobby's finger tightened on the trigger, every fiber of his being screaming for him to end it, to make Taurus pay for all the lives he'd destroyed, all the worlds he'd ravaged. But as he stared into the face of his hated enemy, he saw something else there. Beneath the anger and the hate, he saw fear. In that moment, Bobby realized that if he struck Taurus down in cold blood, he would be no better than the monster he'd fought so hard to defeat. He would be just another tyrant, ruling through fear and violence. And that was not what Zephyr had sacrificed himself for. That was not what any of them had fought for. Slowly, Bobby lowered the staff, his chest heaving with exertion and emotion. "No," he said, his voice raw and ragged. "I won't do it. I won't become like you. You'll face justice for your crimes, Taurus, but it won't be at my hands." He turned his back on the fallen king, tossing the energy staff aside with a clatter, but as he took a step towards the shattered doors of the throne room, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Taurus lunged for a hidden blaster at his belt, his face contorted with rage and desperation. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Bobby spun, reaching for his own weapon. But before he could bring it to bear, a plasma bolt sizzled through the air, striking Taurus square in the chest. The king staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Bobby whirled to see Zephyr, propped up on one elbow, his plasma pistol smoking in his hand. The assassin's face was pale and drawn, his breath coming in short, agonized gasps. He had thrown himself between Bobby and Taurus, taking the shot meant for his friend. "Zephyr!" Bobby cried, rushing to his side. He cradled the fallen assassin in his arms, feeling the warmth of his blood soaking through his armor. "Do it then, human," he spat, blood flecking his lips. "Finish what you started." Bobby raised the pistol, his hand trembling with grief and rage. For a long moment he stood there, poised on the brink of vengeance, the faces of all those he'd lost flashing through his mind. Then, with a roar of anguish and fury, he pulled the trigger. All around the palace the sounds of battle began to fade, as word of the king's fall spread. Tarian soldiers threw down their weapons, some fleeing, others surrendering to the victorious resistance forces. On the steps of the ruined palace, Bobby stood amidst the smoking wreckage, his armor scorched and dented, his face streaked with blood and grime. At his side stood his crew, battered but unbroken, their eyes shining with the light of hard-won victory. In the streets of the capital, the people began to emerge from their hiding places, their faces alight with disbelief and joy. They thronged the battered resistance fighters, cheering and weeping, embracing them as liberators and heroes. But for Bobby, the victory was bittersweet. As he looked out over the celebrating crowds, his heart ached for those who weren't there to see it, for Zephyr, for the brave men and women of the resistance who had given their lives for this moment. He knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that there were still battles to be fought and wounds to be healed, but as he stood there, surrounded by his friends and allies, he felt a glimmer of hope amid the sorrow and the loss. They had won their freedom, through blood and sacrifice and sheer stubborn determination, and now it fell to them to protect it, to build a new future from the ashes of the old, a future where no one would have to live in fear, where no tyrant could ever again threaten the peace and liberty of the galaxy. It was a daunting task, but one that Bobby knew they could not shrink from. For the sake of all those who had fallen, for the generations yet to come, they would rise to meet it, together. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.